Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping headfirst into the wild world of modern conspiracy culture. We're going to look at where some of these really outlandish ideas get started, see how they're actually debated online, and then dig into the science of how we can fight back against misinformation.
To really get a handle on this whole ecosystem, you kind of have to understand the type of figure who often ends up at the center of it all. So let's kick things off with the truly bizarre and fascinating story of David Icke.
You know, for years, David Icke was a household name in British sports. He was a professional soccer player, then he became this really respected presenter for the BBC. I mean, he was a trusted face you saw on national TV every week. But then, in the early 90s, his life took, well, a very sharp turn.
So Icke goes on this hugely popular TV show and declares that he is a son of the godhead. The host, Terry Wogan, comes back with that brutal line you see right there. He tells him, "They're laughing at you." And the audience just roared. In that single moment, Icke went from being a respected public figure to a national joke, literally overnight.
Okay, so let's get into it. What followed was this incredibly sprawling worldview. He mixes New Age ideas about vibrational energy with this gigantic conspiracy about a race of interdimensional reptilian aliens called the Archons. He says they've hijacked our planet and that a hybrid reptilian-human elite, you know them, the Illuminati, are manipulating everything just to feed off our negative energy. Oh, and the moon? He says it's not real. It's an artificial command center broadcasting our fake reality.
So, where do ideas like this actually live and breathe online? Well, it's not nearly as simple as you might think. And that brings us to the really interesting culture of online conspiracy forums.
It is so easy to just write these ideas off as fringe, right? Something for a tiny minority. But the data tells a totally different story. A major survey found that half of the American public believes in at least one conspiracy theory. This stuff is way more mainstream than most of us probably think. So, this brings up a really important question. Are these online forums just giant echo chambers where everyone agrees with each other? I mean, that's the common assumption. But an incredible deep dive study into Reddit's r/conspiracy forum shows a much more complicated and, honestly, more interesting reality. Turns out it's not one big happy family of believers at all. It's more like a constant battleground between three different groups. You've got your diehard believers. Then you have the doubters, who are always in there pushing back and poking holes in the theories. And then there's this third group that just engages in play. They love the game of it all, connecting the dots, exploring the what-ifs, but they never actually commit to believing it. The whole culture is really defined more by conflict than it is by agreement. And this is the perfect example of that conflict. You might think David Icke's reptilian theory is like a gateway to other conspiracies, but it's actually the opposite. It gets used inside the community as a weapon. People will point to the lizard theory to make fun of other ideas they think are too crazy, saying things like, "Oh, that's just disinformation planted to make us all look nuts." It's their way of drawing a line in the sand about what's a legitimate conspiracy and what's not.
Okay, so if the online culture is this messy mix of believers, doubters, and players, how on earth do experts and institutions even start to think about countering harmful misinformation and disinformation, or MDM as they call it? One of the most important strategies is called inoculation theory. And yeah, that metaphor is 100% intentional. It works just like a vaccine, but for your brain. The idea isn't to argue with people who already believe something, but to protect everyone else before they get hit with the full-strength version of a false story. Here's how it works. First, you get a heads up, a warning that someone's going to try to manipulate you. Then, you're shown a weakened, flimsy version of their argument, and you're taught how to dismantle it. This whole process builds up what you can think of as cognitive antibodies. So later, when you see the real thing out in the wild, your brain is already prepped to spot the manipulation and fight it off. So inoculation is all about prevention. It's the before strategy. But there are other tools in the toolkit. Debunking and fact-checking are more like treatments. They're for after a piece of misinformation is already out there. And then you've got media literacy, which is the long-term game, teaching everybody the critical thinking skills to evaluate all the information that comes their way. But, just like with any medical treatment, these interventions aren't a perfect silver bullet. Researchers have found some potential complications and side effects that we really need to know about. One of the biggest hurdles is something called the continued influence effect. It's this really frustrating thing where even after a piece of misinformation has been totally corrected, it doesn't just disappear from our brains.
The original lie can kind of linger in the background and still influence how we think, even when we consciously know it's wrong. So corrections are vital, but they can't always completely undo the damage.
There's another potential side effect, too. When you teach people to be on the lookout for fake news, you run the risk of creating news cynicism, which is basically a blanket distrust of all information. And that's really different from healthy skepticism. A skeptic asks for evidence. A cynic just assumes everything is a lie from the get-go, which isn't productive at all.
But here's the good news, and this is really important. The research shows that while these strategies might cause a tiny dip in trust for mainstream news, that effect is absolutely dwarfed by the much, much bigger drop in people's belief in actual fake news. So yeah, there's a small risk, but the main effect is exactly what we want. People become way more resilient to falsehoods.
So, what have we learned from this whole journey? We've gone from talking about shape-shifting reptilians all the way to the hard science of belief. What does it all tell us about the world we're living in? We started with one seriously wild idea, but it opened up this whole vast ecosystem. It's not just a world of believers, it's a world of doubters and players, all locked in this constant debate. And it's a world that science is now trying to map out, using tools like inoculation to try and build a more resilient public. And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. We put so much energy into fighting lies and spotting what's fake. But maybe, the ultimate skill we all need to build isn't just about knowing what's false. Maybe it's about the much harder, more personal process of figuring out how we decide what's true.